So hello. Hello. Yeah, my name's Gary. Yeah, it's one of my favorite photographs. And today I want to tell you a story, and it's a story about my life. Somebody described it really well when I've given this talk before. It's my origin story, which is pretty cool. It makes it sound more interesting than it really is, but that's good. It starts back when I was really young. That's me there. I had hair and I was skinny. That's proof that at one point in my life I did have hair. Yep. But we really should make a start with where I went to university. I went to university in Leicester, which is a kind of obscure Midland city in the UK. And I failed university. It turns out computer science is really hard and full of maths. I thought it would just be like coding and playing games, and turns out it's a really difficult subject that I really couldn't get into. So I failed university and then went back to a university in Wales, in Pontypridd. And I also failed that course too. So I failed university twice, so let's just get that right out there right now. I mainly sort of failed university because the second time because I actually got offered a job doing what I wanted to do, a job in the computer industry. It's probably worth addressing the fact that I'm not Italian, in case you hadn't noticed. I have this really funny accent. I'm from a really small town called Port Talbot in South Wales, so it's just there. And if my geography's any good, I think we're somewhere around there. Is that fairly accurate? Is that close enough? Yeah? So there's something that's really interesting about Port Talbot, the town of Port Talbot in South Wales, and people from certain heavy industry may recognize the name. A good way to show this is if you do a Google image search for Verona. These are the wonderful images that you get to see. You notice that because everybody, when I'm in Italy, Google thinks that I want everything in Italian for some reason. I mean, considering everything else they can do, you'd think they could get that right. But yeah, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And then you do a Google image search for Port Talbot, and this is what you see. It's kind of defined by one thing, which is the steelworks, and it really does just sit right there on the edge of the town. Excuse me. It just sits there right on the edge of the town, but it's a really good thing for people like myself and people like the people in this room, because it's a steelworks, and therefore it has a lot of microprocessors, monitoring things, recording stuff, checking how thin is the steel at this process, how hot is the furnace over here. So there's a lot of monitoring equipment. So I went to work. I left university the second time, and I went to work in British Steel, which then became Chorus, and now is called Tata Steel. And this was in 1998, 1999, and we had this wonderful thing at the time called the Y2K bug. Is anyone like me in this room old enough to have worked on the Y2K problems? Yeah, there's a few old heads, good. So the Y2K bug, if you didn't know, was because short-sighted programmers in the 60s and 70s, and 80s and 90s, stored a date format, the year format of a date in 2 digits, so 77 for 1977. And nobody really knew what would happen when the year rolled out round to 00 with all these 2-digit stored dates. Nobody knew if things would continue to work, if they would break, what was going to happen. So it was a wonderful time to get into computing because there was a lot of work around trying to fix these Y2K problems. My job was kind of less interesting. I was responsible for looking at all the microprocessors on the site, not just me, but I was one of a team, and checking out whether all of these microprocessors were Y2K compliant. And that sounds like it's a really good job, digging into the ladder logic in the code. But really all I did was phone people up and say, we have part number ABC123, could you tell me if it's Y2K compliant, please? And if it was, put a tick on a spreadsheet. And if they couldn't tell us, then just mark it for someone far more intelligent than me to actually go and look at the code and try and figure that thing out. So it was a very boring and mundane job. There's a lot of waiting for phone calls to be returned, a lot of waiting for emails to be returned. So I did what most people, I think, who have a Windows machine at their disposal in work and don't have really a lot of things to do. I started playing a lot of MAME ROMs while I was waiting for the phone calls to be returned. So does anyone know which game this is? Not if you've been to the talk before, you may not answer. Does anyone know the game? Yeah, shout it out if you know. Circus Charlie, yeah, really good game. One I never played in the arcade, and only found from the power of MAME. If you don't know what MAME is, it allows you to play old ROMs from old arcade games on your desktop computer. It's really good. While I was doing that, the year 2000 came and went, and the planes didn't fall out of the sky, and the banks didn't lose everybody's data about what money they had. Life continued. And I still had a job, thankfully. So I started moving into the process control. And as I say, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of metrics coming in on the plant. Every second, there's thousands of these metrics coming in. And that's a really lucrative job for the people who were running our process control systems. Managers want to see exactly what's going on in their area of the plant. And we had this bespoke piece of software that meant every time we wanted a new screen to be written, we had to pay somebody thousands of pounds to write the new screens for us. But all this stuff was stored in an Oracle database on site. So we had this thing, which was kind of popular around the 90s and 2000s, called an intranet. Again, people who are of a certain age will remember intranets back when the web was new and shiny and people didn't really know what to put on these intranets, these internal systems. But we had one, and we had one that was capable of rendering pages, and it was capable of rendering dynamic pages. We were actually running a Microsoft domain, and I found out that there was these things called active server pages that allowed you to render data from a database onto a screen. I was like, this must be a cheaper way of us being able to show this data where it needs to be shown. Anyone work with ASP? Anyone work with, as they call it, classic ASP now? I feel your pain. This is ASP. This is a genuine image that I found on the web when I Googled for ASP, when I was looking for images. And the interesting thing about this is it's a terrible choice of logo. It's like working with ASP is like rolling a dice, you know? It's like, is it really going to work? Do you need a 666 to get going? And even more interestingly, like really trying to get it to work properly is like trying to balance dice end on end. It's like, that's not a very good sort of logo. But yeah, I worked with ASP, and that was great. That was really good fun. I was really starting to enjoy interacting with databases and displaying stuff on web pages, which is something that basically we all still do in this room right now. But there's a big problem with ASP at the time. I was playing a lot of online games at the time. The internet was new and shiny. Broadband had become a thing. So you could really get into these games, playing a lot of Quake, and then eventually a lot of Counter-Strike. And if you've played any Counter-Strike, if there's any Counter-Strike players in the room, if there's any Counter-Strike players who played sort of clan Counter-Strike, where you meet up and play in a ladder, you know that the most important thing about a Counter-Strike clan is how good their website is. Like, it doesn't really matter how good you are as a team. The competition was all about who had the best website with live server stats and news and all that kind of thing. So I really wanted to get into doing more hobbyist side projects, but ASP was so expensive to run. The license costs were ridiculously expensive. You had to have a Windows NT server license. You needed an MS SQL Server license. You needed an Internet Information Server license. None of this stuff was free back then, thousands of pounds. So I found this thing that was free and open source called Personal Homepage, or PHP hypertext preprocessor, where PHP means PHP hypertext preprocessor. Too much recursion. But this stuff was free and open source, and we could just sit, and hosting was really cheap. Even back then, shared hosting was ridiculously cheap. $5, $10, $20 a month, not thousands and thousands of pounds. And this is great. So, yep, I learned PHP by copying other people's tutorials and just changing the bits that I wanted to change, which is the traditional way, I think. And yeah, here we go. Here's my first clan website from back in the day. This should look familiar to any Counter-Strike clan players. These were kind of, interestingly, my design skills have not improved over the years, so. Yeah, and there's another really good thing. I mean, I didn't have a copy of this. I had to go on the Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive of websites, to try and find this. And there were 3 snapshots for this website. One about a month before this one, and one about a month afterwards. And the one a month before was like of a Plesk control panel. So again, people of a certain generation will know what I mean, where you could manage your shared hosting from the Plesk control panel. More interestingly, the one from a month later was this. Just to prove that I've been coding bugs from all the way back then, you know? Yeah, so this is, again, familiar. And PHP, I was starting to really enjoy coding in PHP. I was still coding in ASP in work, but really doing less and less of that and more mundane stuff, more tech support stuff, more, you know, just monitoring and managing a Windows domain. It wasn't very interesting. I was doing more programming outside of work. I was also playing way too many main ROMs, so things were getting a bit hairy. Does anyone know? Shout it out, yeah, Double Dragon. Great game. So I did what everyone does when they want to program more and when they know a little bit about PHP. I became a contractor. I had no idea what I was doing with PHP, you know, I really didn't, but people were willing to pay me. I was a terrible developer, but people were willing to pay me to get things done because I quickly got a reputation of being able to get a job done on time and being able to get a job done whatever it takes, effectively. I mean, I was a terrible developer if your metrics are code reuse and, you know, copy and paste and all that stuff, awful. But I was an okay developer if you really just needed to get something done and get it done quickly. I could do that. I could just scrap things together and just get things running. I was doing a lot of work for companies who wanted to run like short-term promotions, so the maintainability of the site didn't really matter. You know, I was doing a job for Intel, the processor manufacturer. How I managed to do that after only a couple of months working with PHP is anyone's guess, but they were desperate. They had a 6-week promotion running where they wanted their resellers, this wasn't a public-facing site, their resellers could log in, and the more processors their resellers sold, the more sort of gifts they would get, and the first person to sell something like £200,000 worth of processors would win a car. But the way they wanted to display this was in a Flash movie with a moving sort of path to show how close you were to getting to the goal. Remember Flash? It's cool. So the Flash movie interacted with an XML, and all my PHP script needed to do was to generate a parse an XML document. Pretty straightforward. And they would just send me every week the data for me to import in the database so that it would be up to date. But they would send me the data in an Excel spreadsheet. It's kind of a pain to get that into the database. Not so bad now. We have sort of parser tools and ways that we can interact, good libraries, nothing back then. And of course, they sent me an Excel spreadsheet that was in a completely different format every week that they sent it to me. So it's like, oh, and by the way, it needs to be up by 9 o'clock in the morning, and they'd send it to me at 5 o'clock at night, of course. So a lot of long hours, a lot of, you know, long scrapping through, but it's a good reputation to have, right? When projects were in trouble, I was getting a reputation of being somebody who could really help and somebody who would do whatever it takes to get stuff done, which is a kind of nice thing to do. I was kind of, you know, my child had come along and I was getting really tired of the up and down life of a contractor where I'm really, really rich, I'm really, really poor, I'm really, really rich, you know, the money comes all in at once and I'm terrible with money, so yeah, 5-star hotel one week, trying to borrow money for food off my mother the next week, so life was getting a bit difficult. So I took a full-time job, you know, the recurring salary is a really nice thing to have in that situation, so I went to work for a company who called Vivo Digital, and they had the exclusive rights for importing set-top boxes that had a browser and JavaScript in there. And we were doing IPTV when that was kind of new and shiny. It wasn't really a big deal. Like now, everyone streams everything over IP and it's just completely normal. But back then, it was kind of cool. So yeah, we also did some stuff like digital signage, which was new and shiny then. And again, like every mom and pop store has got like digital signage on the till and stuff now. It's kind of really common to see it, but it was kind of an interesting thing. More interesting for me was that we wanted to rewrite the software that ran this digital signage stuff. So we wanted to write it modular. We were selling things to our customers, and people would pay more for the more features they wanted. And the way that I was sort of disabling the features for the people who weren't paying for them was to just comment out the anchor in the HTML and then ship the box to them. It's like, yeah, that's fine. It's cool. They won't know. But yeah, we wanted to make it really properly modular. So I Google searched, as you do, PHP Modular Framework, and like 1 million PHP classes links came up. Yeah, that was a thing, wasn't it? And some other frameworks came up, things like Symfony and those kind of things. But interestingly, we already had a relationship with Zend. We were using their Zend Guard product. So when I saw that Zend, a company we already had a relationship with, were doing a framework, that looks good. Weirdly, I chose that because it really wasn't modular at all. So even though I was looking for a modular framework, I didn't find one, but I found a framework. Yeah, Adobe and PHP, now that's rich. Cool. This is genuine from the day. The 1.7 is the first release I worked with. And I quickly started working, this is the time that I discovered like such language features as the new keyword, things like of that nature. I was totally just doing procedural PHP in with the HTML, which when you look back is like, wow, did I really do that? But we all started somewhere. So this was really cool, and I quickly became an amazing developer in my own mind. Like I could do anything with this stuff. This is really cool, and it's a really dangerous place to be because I really thought I knew enough. I'm never going to need to learn anything new in my career. I've got enough here now that I can just churn out websites. I can churn out anything that my customers want, and that's so dangerous. Because it turns out what I think is the peak of my learning is just like a false peak. And behind that is a huge, even bigger mountain that I need to climb. So I'm very lucky that I realized that fairly quickly because it's a dangerous place to be. I was a terrible developer in reality, absolutely terrible. And I had loads of questions when I realized that. Like, if I'm doing this wrong, what's the right way? Where do I find these answers to these questions? And being a gamer from a Counter-Strike clan, of course, there was IRC channel. IRC is what we used to use before Slack and Discourse. I found ZF Talk, and it was an amazing, amazing place. It was like a proper epiphany for me to join this channel where I could speak to other developers who were using the same tools as me and solving the same problems as me. Really, really cool. Until that time, I'd been working in a sole developer or small like teams with one or two where you didn't really have any involvement with other developers. So to realize that I'm not alone in my job, to realize that I'm not just the only person using this product, I'm not the only person coding using this and using that, was absolutely amazing. And I mean, everybody in this room has obviously recognized that now because you're at a conference, right? But I'm sure people can remember if when you first discovered there's a greater community of developers. It's an amazing feeling. I met some really cool people. Ryan Mauger helped me out so much in my early career. I mean, I owe him a debt of thanks. And Rob Allen, the same. Really nice people. And also Catherine Reeve deserves a mention. She really helped me out when I was learning at the beginning. But Rob and Ryan have been instrumental really in my career and in my growth as a developer. They forced me to go to the first ever PHP Southwest meeting in the UK, in Bristol. I am there. There I am. You can just see my big fat belly sticking out. There we go. Beautiful. Yeah, I was at that first ever meeting, which is kind of cool considering there's like 100, 150 people at some of their events now. So really nice to be there. But really, if we go back to the job, it's getting really tedious. We'd lost a lot of contracts. The hardware wasn't particularly reliable that we were using. A lot of support stuff going on. And motivation was way down. So, of course, I started playing MAME ROMs more than doing work. Anyone know this? Think before you answer. Ghouls and ghosts, yes, not ghosts and goblins. Anyone who said ghosts and goblins, leave now, please. No, not really. No, it's fine. So I went to work for a games company, Microcosm Games. Wrote games for Facebook. Wrote games for Facebook. Yeah, you must remember those Facebook games where really you just click on a box like until power runs out and encouraged to spam your friends and collect this and be a pirate and be a vampire and click the box and spam your friends. Those kind of games I worked on. So I'm very sorry. Interestingly, we were a tiny company based in Cardiff in South Wales, and we had an official license to Lord of the Rings, which is like bizarre when you think back like that. How did that happen? They had a pre-existing relationship with Tolkien Estate, and they managed to get a license to write a Lord of the Rings game, which we ran on Facebook fairly successfully. Amazing, really. My favorite at the time was that I wrote a game and deployed it to Facebook, and all it involved was pressing a button when you saw it in your friend's feed That's like all the game was, and it was a huge success. Highly profitable. Like stripped back any storyline, and you just had to find these buttons and press them, and it was a massive success. So that's like, wow, that's really cool. But the most interesting thing that happened during my time at Microcosm Games was this. This is my first ever contribution to open source. So this is Zen Framework 2. I never contributed to Zen Framework 1. This is Zen Framework 2. And this is just, everything was being rewritten to use namespaces from Zen Framework 1 to Zen Framework 2. And this is just a tiny fix that allows the namespaces to, the session storage to have namespace classes in there instead of underscores. Tiny, tiny fix. The most interesting thing is, like, this is why I stuck around after this first ever commit, because Matthew Weir-Finney, the nicest man in the world, that is such a nice way to welcome somebody to contribute to your open source project. You know, that's how you do it. Thank you very much. My favorite bit there is particularly the tests, because these, not only is this my first ever pull request, these are my first ever unit tests too. So, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And when I say unit test, all I did was copy this one and put it down there and just change one character in it. You know, that's what I did for my first ever unit tests. But hey, it got said thank you, and it got said particularly the tests. The interesting thing here is look at what this contribution really is. Just the green bit. That's my first ever contribution to open source, but it fixed a bug. It's 3 characters, and copy and paste the tests. It's 3 characters, and that's how I got started in open source. It's really intimidating sometimes to actually get started in open source, and because of people like Matthew, is how I managed to kind of get over the nerves and actually make that first contribution. So I've got a question. Does anyone want to have a guess what I did? I submitted this pull request sort of 5 p.m. my time, and Matthew lives in the US, so when I woke up the next day, it had been reviewed, it had been merged. So can anyone guess what the first thing is that I did after that pull request had been merged? Any guesses? A beer? No, it was a little bit early in the morning, even for me. So, yeah, there was no beer involved. Any other guesses? No alcohol at all, thank you. You don't have to just keep naming different drinks. There was no alcohol. Of course, I updated my CV. It's the truth. That one, the one contribution counts. That one 3-character change and the copy and pasted test counts. It really does count. And contributing to open source is really scary. That first time that you put yourself out there to be judged by your peers, to have your code judged by your peers, is really scary. Really, really scary. There's ways you can make it easier. You know, I had peer reviews from friends before that even was a pull request publicly. I got people like Rob Allen to look at that for me, and you know, on the side, and he's like, yeah, it looks perfectly sane to me. You don't have to throw yourself straight out there. And if you don't look at it as people judging you, if you look at it as free code reviews by people who may be more experienced, smarter than you even, smarter than me for sure, if you look at it that way, if you flip it on its head and think, people aren't trying to criticize me because they want to, people want to help me, people want to tell me, yeah, that works, but did you consider doing this? It's free learning. Free code reviews is free learning. And that's the way I look at my contributions now. And the other thing to remember is most people want you to get your pull requests merged. If you fix a bug and submit a pull request, you're fixing that bug for everyone. If you add a new feature, you're adding a new feature for everyone. Most people really want you to get your stuff merged. I say most people. We have Marco in the front row right here in front of me, so. Marco, has anyone ever had their code reviewed by Marco? Has anyone ever had a pull request reviewed by Marco? Marco was very thorough at code reviews, and to be fair, when you work with a project like Doctrine, when you work for a big project like Doctrine where there's, you know, I don't know how many users Doctrine has, but certainly a lot of users and a lot of edge cases. Marco says 3 users. I think you're being a bit generous there, Marco. No, when you have all those users, you have to be really aggressive in the code quality. I don't know if anyone went to Marco's extremely defensive PHP talk, which is something, I think it's a really good talk. But, you know, it does get a bit relentless after a while. The comments just keep coming and you keep making changes. And the comments keep coming and you keep making changes. And the changes you make more comments come. And then you start dreading to see that little Mario in your inbox looking at you. It's like, oh no, Marco's not gonna, oh no, I don't want to check my email. Because that little Mario just keeps coming at you. It keeps coming at you over and over and over and over again. There's Mario in my inbox. There's Mario in my GitHub. There's Mario looking at me. Mario's there. Marco is there. Marco is always watching you. You're too generous, thank you. But the point is still there. Free code reviews, free learning. Like, I really don't want to put anyone on the spot, so I'll just say, you know, just to gauge interest, how many people have committed to committed a patch to an open source project? Don't be embarrassed. Yeah, that's pretty cool. You know, it's a genuine chance for free learning, and that's the truth. Like, I would not be a fraction of the developer I am today without all the stuff I've learned through my contributions to open source. And I take that every opportunity to try and get that free learning myself, and I encourage you to do the same. Meanwhile, these two people had decided that I'd gone to a user group and they wanted to take me to my first ever conference. So I went to PHP Northwest in Manchester. It's a really nice conference. It's a community style conference, a really nice vibe. And I met this guy there, Evan Coury, who I'd known for a long time online. Yeah, it's like, I was really nervous about going to the event because, like, meeting people you only know from the internet, which was kind of scary then. I guess we just take that for granted today as well. We just, yeah, it's fine, you know. Been speaking to them on Twitter, we'll go up and have a beer somewhere. But it was kind of intimidating back then. I met Evan, really, really nice guy. He'd flown over from the States. I met Lorna Mitchell, who's been like my unofficial speaking mentor since meeting Lorna, an amazing, amazing woman. She's the one person who told me I shouldn't give talks wearing a Hawaiian shirt, which is good advice. Good advice. I did an unconf talk. There was an unconf at this conference here. I did an unconf in the first ever conference I went to, which is kind of scary. Notice how I got 4 stars in my first ever unconf talk, which doesn't sound so amazing when you think that it was only people I knew who I counted friends in the audience, and I still only got 4 stars. So it's not quite so impressive then. But yeah, I gave an unconf talk, and it was an amazing experience to go to my first ever event. I'm glad and I'm lucky that I get to travel to events very regularly now. I'm privileged to be able to do that. But this first event sort of blew my mind. Learning about new technologies, learning more about technologies I already knew from some really cool speakers was amazing. Meanwhile, my job at Microcosm Games, we'd lost the license for Lord of the Rings. Like, a real company decided that they wanted, I think the Hobbit movie was in production, and like a big budget company just said to Tolkien, why have you given them the license? We want to make a game on Facebook. And they just said, yeah, you're right, and threw the license out. So almost overnight, I went from really enjoying coding a database with a game front end on it to like playing loads of MAME ROMs right overnight. Anyone know this one? Burger Time, yeah, Burger Time, good. It's really cool, but I managed to get a job in a place in Swansea. I live in Swansea, which is just down the road from where I'm from, 20 minutes away from Port Talbot. And I was very lucky that I got a job, again, working in a questionable industry. Yamgo AdSpruce, who were responsible for streaming data to mobile phones, Yamgo, and putting adverts on mobile phones, which we all absolutely hate. Popovers, pop-unders, pop-outs, pop-up, pop this. It's, we were trying to kind of beat the ad blockers and on mobile phones, but we were trying to target sort of older devices that you see in a lot of in India and Pakistan, sort of Nokia rugged handsets, the old feature phones as we call them. Pretty cool challenges, pretty cool technical challenges, big scale. I quite, really enjoyed those challenges. I'd done a lot more speaking. I'd attended a lot more conferences. I was very, very lucky. You'll notice that the first conference I actually got accepted to was ZenCon, which is kind of, intimidating. ZenCon's was a big event in the day, a very big event. And stop nodding, you look like a nodding dog or something. And I only got accepted to that event, I'm convinced to this day, because I was contributing to the Zen framework, and it was like a thank you for the contributions that you've done. Because why would they accept a speaker who had never spoken before at a big event, unless they kind of were trying to give something back to the community, which was amazing. Yeah, a quick note, my first time here in Verona, and what an amazing conference this is. Organisers have done a fantastic job. As speakers, we like things to be made easy, and thank you very much. You've done an amazing job keeping, the attendees have been fantastic. I've had a really nice time. I definitely will be submitting and attending again to come here. So thank you very much for letting me come here and speak. But yeah, the reason I started being able to be up on this stage and speak is because I'd been contributing to open source. That's a fact, really. You can't overestimate that. But if you want to contribute and you're still a little bit scared about putting your code out there to be looked at by your peers and reviewed, you don't have to just contribute with code. Documentation fixes are always welcome for everybody. If you find like a typo in a code sample, something that's even slightly wrong, just commit that straight back. Often you don't even need to open an editor. You can do it right within GitHub these days. Just fork it, edit the file, submit the pull request back. Such an easy thing to do. May only take you 2 minutes. And everybody else who comes along and reads that documentation gets the benefit of having it fixed. So such an easy thing to do and such a massive impact. Triage is always a really good thing. People who run huge open source projects who have bugs to fix, having somebody report a bug and then have someone commenting on the bug saying, yes, I reproduced this and these are the steps I did, means that the person who comes along to fix it afterwards doesn't have to do that mundane piece of work. So really useful. People like Marco who work on these open source projects love easy reproduced steps to fix bugs. So you'll be the best friend of the maintainers if you start doing that. Like writing tests, one of the places I leveled up my test skills was by contributing tests to Joined-In, the website we use to review. They didn't have a lot of tests, and I wanted to practice my tests. So, brilliant place to learn, brilliant place to practice your skills in open source. There's lots of projects out there that will be really delighted to have better test coverage, so it's a really nice thing to do. Other things like answering questions on Stack Overflow or on IRC, writing blog posts. Writing blog posts is a great way to level up your personal brand, and it's contributing something to an open source community. So that's a really nice win-win there as well. The thing about contributing to open source that I've touched on is that when you start contributing to an open source project, you have to go under the hood. You have to get in the vendor folders of the libraries and the stuff that you're using, and you have to take a look at the code and how it works. Even if you're writing documentation, you still need to kind of look at the code to try and figure out what's going on to make sure your documentation is right. And when you get under the hood, and when you know how a library works internally and not just how to call its external API, that makes you an expert. And that's the truth. The experts in open source libraries and projects and frameworks just tend to know exactly what's going on under the hood. That's all they know, a little bit more than the users. And when you become an expert, then it has a massive impact on your career. It has a massive impact on your career. And for me and for other people I know who've contributed to open source, it means effectively you earn more money. And that's the truth of it. That's the blunt truth of it is, there we go, sorry, yeah. Effectively, that's the truth. You can earn more money, and I really, really like money. So contributing to open source really does, there we go. Contributing to open source really does make you earn more money, and that's the truth. Being an expert in a technology allows you to earn more money. That's a fact. Interestingly, when you start contributing to open source projects, you start making connections with the other contributors and the maintainers, and those connections also have value to an employer. Being able to say, yeah, I work on this open source project, but I also know the lead maintainers and I have direct ways to connect with them is actually worth something to employers. That's a fact. And that means you can earn more money because you have contact with the developers, the core developers of a project, and yeah, you can mercilessly just abuse that connection and make loads more money, and that's the truth. If you've contributed, most other contributors don't mind helping you out because you've kind of paid it back. You've paid it back already. They know that you're not just trying to get answers for nothing. You've already kind of done your work, so that really works well. I guess more importantly for me, even though I really like money, as I've said a couple of times, some of the connections I've made through contributing to open source have become proper, real friendships. Friendships I really value to this day, so that's a really nice bonus as well. But yeah, if I get off my high horse for a minute, yeah, the job at Spruce, the technical challenges were solved. It was really now just about keeping stuff running, and the fun is in the solving of the problems. The fun for me isn't in the maintaining and just keeping stuff running. So my motivation kind of gone. I was playing a lot of main ROMs. Anyone know this one? Pac-Land, yeah, one of my favorites of all time. Love that game. And I decided I wanted to go back and do some consulting. So yeah, I went to work for Rove, who's a full cycle consultancy for PHP and really specializing in Zen framework because a lot of the employees are co-contributors to the Zen framework. I was an amazing time, loved it, absolutely loved it. Interesting, and the reason I started working at Rove is because I met this guy at PHP Northwest, if you remember, all that time back in the story. So those connections actually meant that I effectively got a job because of the contribution to open source I'd done. I also work with this guy, James, who's not here. He's in a sauna somewhere. And when I said Marco is always watching, those eagle-eyed people will notice that Marco is always watching you. And James has become like one of my go-to people for a beer when I'm at a conference, when I just need to kind of chill out and relax. And James has become a really good friend. There's a few more people I met who don't work for Rove, but people like Derek Rethens, good friend of mine, and always one of the first people I'll look for to have a beer with at an event. And interestingly, the author of Xdebug and Datetime. So when I have questions about that, I've got that in my back pocket. So that's cool. People like Kieran McNulty, who I really, again, if I'm away in a conference, is kind of a go-to guy for a beer. And he's the maintainer of PHP Spec. So if I have any questions about that, I've got that in my back pocket too. It's a really interesting thing about Kieran is if you were, say, writing a talk and you needed to find a picture of Kieran to put on a slide, so you type Kieran McNulty into Google and then do a Google image search. This is what comes up. This is quite scary. If you haven't noticed it, I'll give you a clue. If you do a Google image search for Kieran McNulty, you get a photo of me drinking beer, which is like kind of scary. To keep the narrative going, and don't worry, there's not that much longer left. I'm keeping you from beer, I know. And you can see beer next to you and stuff, so it's kind of cool. But I really would like to say that I was getting disenfranchised at Rove and I'd started playing a lot of main ROMs, but sadly that's not the truth. It would have been a nice end to the story. Anyone shout it out? Rastan, I did hear that over there. Good job. Yeah, Rastan. But JetBrains came calling, and JetBrains were looking for a developer advocate for PHP Storm. Fine ID, if anyone doesn't use PHP Storm. Is anyone going to admit to not using PHP Storm? Okay, I'll convince you. Find me after. They needed a developer advocate, and a developer advocate is a really, really weird role. Mainly it involves tweets like this. This is my job, basically, in one tweet. But I only got that job because Carl Evans put me onto it, and Carl I'd met at many conferences, the godfather of PHP as we call him. And I'd only met Carl Evans and got this job for me. I get to come to speak, I come to conferences and speak. I get to write blog posts, record videos, and not really do any real work. It's amazing. The only reason I'm doing this job that I absolutely love is because of this. Because of this first pull request I did in 2011, and that's the truth. I can trace the path straight to where I am because I contributed once, this one pull request. It'd be really cool now. I could just leave the story there and go, look at me, I got the job I always wanted because I contributed to open source, and yeah, you'd all give me a round of applause and we'd be great. We'd go and drink beer. But it's really there's some other things I need to say that are difficult to talk about because it's not really all about the beer and the hot dogs and the money, which I love. Open source has improved me as a person, and that's a fact. When I was growing up in a small town in South Wales where everyone looks like me, not just like me, that would be really weird, but everybody like looks a bit like me, and everybody sounds like me, and that's true. Why are you giggling? Whoa, no, it's not. I don't sound that funny, right? I was guilty of, seeing people who were different to me and sniggering and making horrible jokes, and I'm not proud of that fact, but it's the truth. And being in this job and traveling to conferences has allowed me to meet more diverse people than I could ever imagine. And that's made me a much more accepting person and a better person, and that's kind of important. That's kind of important for me. I'm very privileged to have been able to do that. I'm quite embarrassed when I look at me from 10 years ago, and that's really, really cool. It's amazing when you think of it that way. And it's not really just about the beer and the hot dogs and like the elephants and the money. I went to True North PHP in 2014, and I met this guy, which is worth mentioning. If anyone knows Chris, he's like my kayfabe enemy. Like, we love to just argue on Twitter constantly and all day and every day. But more importantly, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to Chris, I met this guy, Ed Finkler, who gave the closing keynote like I am today. And Ed suffers from fairly severe mental health problems, mental illness, and he stood up on stage and talked about his mental health challenges and how you can help and how you can force your own challenges. He runs an organization called Open Source in Mental Illness. That day really changed my life because it forced me to confront my problems and to go and seek help. I'm medicated now, and my life is so much better than when I was just trying to kind of hide under the covers and deny there was a problem. Particularly coming from that small town in South Wales where you just didn't talk about these things with your friends. Like, you just don't do it. You just would. It's so taboo. Whereas when I come to the developer community and we talk openly about it, it's amazing. So if you have any questions around that, I'm on the board of Open Source in Mental Illness. Drop to OSME Help. We have a fundraiser going on at the moment as well. So for 200 people, you can donate $25 and get $50 worth of DigitalOcean credit, which is kind of useful for those side projects. So yeah, come and find me later if you want to speak about any of that stuff. Really has changed my life seeing Ed speak that day. It's amazing when you think of it that way. Yeah, it turns out it is really, isn't it? It is about the beer, and it is about the hot dogs, and it is about the elephants, and it is about the bumper cars. And of course, it is about the money, and it is about the friendships. I'm so lucky because by accident, I managed to do a job I love because of my contributions to open source. This really has changed my life. And I encourage anyone who doesn't contribute, or who doesn't contribute anymore, or who's let things lapse, to just get involved. There's some amazing people, and there's some amazing people who are willing to spend their time helping you to help an open source project. Thank you very much indeed.